Hello everyone and welcome to another adrenaline-filled episode of watching some random dude on the internet make stuff. Today we're going to be having our first attempt at an O-gauge kit. This one is from PECO. I chose it because it looked relatively simple because it's kind of a big box on wheels. And it's also a plastic kit, so I'm hoping my experience with Tamiya kits and the like will stand me in good stead. The kit comes with the expected plastic components. They're reasonably well molded, but they are in a pretty soft plastic. It also has some nice brass pieces, transfer sheet, and it also has some metal wheels which come pre-weathered with authentic rust, which is a nice addition. So the first thing we're going to do is start putting the floor together. This is one of those stages where you need to take your time to get everything square. Otherwise it's going to end up as wonky as the average Birmingham resident's teeth. The fit here is reasonably good. It only needed a little bit of fettling to get it right. I used a couple of engineer squares to try and keep everything at right angles whilst gluing it, and I used Tamiya extra thin glue because that seeps into the cracks and gives you a reasonably good bond without making a huge mess. So with that done, we can then assemble the main sections of the underframe. This is just made up of a few parts. We have the two sole bars, one left and one right. Again, gluing those on with Tamiya extra thin, and then this large black piece which fits underneath in one chunk. It's like a big reinforcement guy. Again, we glue them on with Tamiya extra thin, and it all goes together pretty easily. So now we're just going to fix a couple of details. I'm starting off by filling in the gaps that we had around the edge of the box using AK grey modelling putty and smoothing it off with a wet brush. And I'm also going to remove the moulded in chains here. They look kind of naff, to be honest. And we're going to find a nice way to do them later in the video. So now we're going to move on to spraying the body. And I'm starting off with a neutral grey, maybe a lightish grey, and I'm gonna spray that all over the wagon, trying to get a nice even coat. And then once that is done, I'm going to change to a white spray paint and focus on spraying from a slightly downwards angle, because I want to create some soft shadows with the transition from the white to the grey paint. And here is the wagon after paint. It isn't looking too interesting right now as essentially a big white box, but we're going to work on the colour scheme as we go. The next stage of assembly is going to be gluing on some of the running gear, so before all that stuff gets in the way, I'm going to paint the sole bars black now whilst I have good access. So now it's time to start looking at the axle boxes. This kit has a kind of interesting setup where the axles can float up and down a few millimeters. I think it's to let all four wheels touch the ground in case your building isn't quite square. No idea if this is common to all kits or if this is just a weird one, but basically we just have a couple of plastic parts that slide up and down below the leaf springs. I did have to clear out a bit of material with my pen drill, but once it's all together you can see the axle box there slides up and down a little bit, which is pretty cool. And yeah, just have to repeat that 3 more times and we've got all 4 corners complete. Then we're going to attach the wheels to the body. I decided to push the suspension onto the axle first and then drop everything in as one unit. So if you've seen any of my videos before, you'll know I don't really know anything about trains, so sorry if I get some of the naming wrong here. But we're going to fit these little cheeky monkeys now, which have something to do with the brakes. The kit wasn't super clear where these are supposed to go exactly. There's a little bit of kind of guesswork isn't the right word, but I had to like look at pictures online of wagons and figuring out how everything should line up. But we got those guys in there, and then also the brakes themselves, again using Tamiya extra thin to glue everything in place. Once those are on, we can fit whatever the hell these things are, which again seem to be some kind of guide for the brake lever. Once again, the kit doesn't really tell you exactly where to put them, so I just looked online for some pictures of similar wagons and put it in roughly the right place. They're not functional bits, they're just there for aesthetic, so it doesn't matter too much where they go. And then we thread the brake lever through. This is one part which was really crying out to be photo etch, like it is really chunky. And now we're going to glue in the connecting rod that joins the two brake levers, one on either side of the wagon. You have to cut this from a little bit of rod that they supply. Not really sure why that isn't a molded piece, but anyway, it's easy to chop it to the right size. And then we add the door bars to on either side of the wagon. Now, one cool feature of this kit is that it comes with sprung buffers. These are an interesting setup where we have a metal turned buffer with a teeny tiny thread on the end. We then push a correspondingly teeny tiny spring onto this and push it through the molded kind of structure of the buffer, I don't know what that's called. And then we have a teeny tiny brass nut which we thread onto the end to hold the whole assembly in place. You can get it most of the way finger tight, and then I just did the final little bit with a pair of pliers. I thought this setup was super neat, and you end up with pretty cool little sprung buffers at the end. And once you've repeated that 3 more times, it's just a case of putting a dab of glue onto the plastic part and then pushing it into the body. So that is the majority of the assembly complete, and we're going to move on to painting the wagon. This is a colour scheme of my own making, and I wanted to go with something relatively bold, so we're going to start by contrasting the white with a reasonably dark grey and painting some sections of the body using the metal strapping as a guide. Now we're going to begin my favourite part of the process, which is of course making everything look nice and decrepit with some weathering. I'm going to start by using some oil paints to create a little bit of colour variation between the planks of wood on the wagon. It's not something I've done before, I've seen other people do it, so we're going to give it a try, going a little bit heavy at this stage with the idea that it will be toned down by the rest of the weathering. We'll have to see how that turns out. Next we have another new process for me. I want to create a cool looking private owner wagon, but couldn't find anyone selling transfers that I liked, and trying to navigate most model railway websites feels like trying to crack the Enigma code, so I just decided to make my own. I made these up in Photoshop and sent them off to be printed. Unfortunately, I did not read the website instructions properly, so you can see some of them got cut off at the edge, but that's okay because I made loads and I'm only going to need a few. To get the spacing correct, I'm chopping each letter out individually and then placing them on the wagon in the usual fashion. I used decal setter and softer to get them to conform to the shape of the body. There's all the grooves in the planks that I'm trying to get them to fit to. However, the transfers are super thick, so there's only so much I could do. One thing that was absolutely paramount to the success of this was following the instructions to the T, so I made sure to use warm water? Yeah, I'd say that looks warm enough. Then once the HOGG lettering is on, I then use some of the white decals from the kit. These ones are much thinner than the ones I had printed. Again, don't know if they're in the right place, I just put them somewhere where they look cool. So once all the transfers are on and I've given them a little bit of time to dry, I'm going to weather them with a sponge using some of the underlying wagon colour to simulate chips. I'm not going to use a toothpick here like I would on a wagon that I've bought, because these kind of decals are a lot more delicate than the ones that wagons come printed with, so you'd just end up removing the whole decal. After all that's done, I brush on a couple of layers of matte varnish, mostly to take the shine off of the decals a little bit, but it also helps to protect them and make them less likely to rub off. And this is my absolute favourite process. splashing on a whole load of dark oil wash and worrying that you've completely ruined all your hard work. But as we know, it is an oil wash, so it means we can remove it. I'm pretty liberal with this because I want to have a reasonably decrepit model, so once I've slathered it all on, I come back with a kitchen roll and a cotton bud and basically work it all back, trying to leave more wash in those filthy crevices and having the other areas a little bit lighter, just to create a nice bit of variation. Then the next stage of the weathering process is another fun one, and that is using pigment powders. I'm just using two colours on the model today. I've got a rusty brown, which I'm using at the minute, focusing lower down on the wagon, particularly on any metal areas, so I've got the sole bars, put a little bit in these metal straps around the door and the diagonal ones, and if I'm doing any streaking kind of motions, then I'm making sure they're coming down from the patch of rust. So once we have applied our lovely rust, I then apply a layer of dirt on top, focusing lower down on the wagon as much as possible and applying it in kind of discrete splodges rather than all over. I think all over is probably more realistic, but I like the splodgy look. I think it's a little bit more interesting to look at, so that's what I've gone for. The next thing we're going to look at is the chain. So you might remember at the very start I sanded off the kind of rubbish looking molded in chain that was in the plastic, and I'm replacing it with this metal chain that I bought off of eBay. It's a really fine linked chain, and I'm painting it before I put it on so I don't make a massive mess. Painting it with a brush and then sort of reopening up the holes with a brass sticky thing I had. And once they're painted in the base color, I apply a little bit of super glue to the model and attach the chain. Once it's attached and looking reasonably good, I then do a tiny bit of weathering just to blend it into the rest of the model. Putting on a wash and a tiny bit of pigment powder as well. The next stage is to install the sprung couplings, which are nice little brass pieces. Rough them up with a piece of sandpaper, spray them white, and then do a little bit of weathering so they match the rest of the body. Once they're done and they're dry, we are going to very carefully insert them into our end. We don't want to scratch the paint too much. Then the spring gets slid over the end of the coupling, and then from there it's just a case of spreading our legs for a nice finish. And once the coupling hooks are in, it's just a case of adding the little 3-hook chain that comes with the kit. So now we're gonna begin another new first for me, and that is making a load for the wagon. We're going to be making a coal load, and I'm starting off by cutting a base from cardboard. This is going to allow us to remove the load when we want to, and is also going to reduce the amount of coal that we use making the load. So I'm just figuring out how high I want that piece of cardboard to sit by stacking a bunch of smaller pieces underneath it, and once I've got a height that I'm happy with, I'm going to glue the stack together with super glue. Then with our stack completed and glued together, I'm going to paint the cardboard black very quickly just to hide any spots which might show through the coal. And after that we're going to put a layer of PVA down onto our base. That's going to give the coal something to stick to. To make the actual load itself, we're using real crushed coal, and I did try and start kind of neat and tidy with it, but then I realized it's best to just absolutely send it and pour it out of the bag onto the little piece of cardboard, and I basically just kept going until I had roughly the kind of shape I wanted and fine-tuned it a little bit at the end by hand. And once we're happy with the shape we've got on the load, we bust out the old Luke Town elixir. This is watered down PVA with a tiny little bit of washing up liquid just to break the tension, and I absolutely slaver this lump of coal with it just to make sure everything's going to stay secure. And with the coal load done, I thought the inside of the wagon looked a little bit too neat. It was a little bit clean, so to make it look more like it had been carrying coal around, I used some black pigment powder and went pretty heavy on the inside to simulate some coal dust. And there we have it, the finished article. I have to say, for my first O-gauge wagon, I'm really pleased with how it turned out. In comparison to N, it's really nice working in a much larger scale. You can really put some details in there. Being able to make things like the chain for the door out of actual chain was really nice, and that's obviously something you couldn't do in N. Anyways, I'll leave you to enjoy these nice shots of the wagon to finish the video. I would like to thank everyone as always for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will catch you next time. See ya!